I'm here with Jared Dubin, who runs Last Night in Basketball Substack. It's a great read for NBA fans. He's got notes about nuanced observations from the night before, articles on key trends throughout the league. It's one of my favorites. Welcome to RealGM Radio, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's a new feeling for RealGM Radio. The intro music is all new. I did the show with Danny a bunch of times, and I like the new music. I like the little video that you got there. It's nice, man.
We sauced it up a little bit. We're on YouTube now. It's like the whole thing. So thanks. Appreciate that. Let's jump right in. I want to talk about some of the league's top defenses, then get to some winners of 2024. Let's start with the NBA Cup, though. The Bucks beat the Thunder. Big Giannis game. Weird three-point shooting game for OKC. How much do you take away from the Bucks winning the NBA Cup?
In terms of like what it means for like the Thunder or Bucks's chances of contention, not really that much. I treat it sort of like another game where the Bucks beat the Thunder. Like you said, it was a very strange shooting game for OKC. I do think that the Bucks had a really good defensive plan against Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and that OKC didn't have as many answers as it should against that kind of stuff. You would have probably wanted to see a little more of what you saw early in the game. Honestly, they were running a lot of stuff through Isaiah Hartenstein with dribble handoffs and his floater and throwing passes from the elbow and things like that. And then in that kind of game, you sort of need Jalen Williams to do more as a creator off the bounce, whether for himself or for everybody else. And I don't think that they got a ton of that. And after a while, it sort of devolved into Shai taking contested step backs from the mid range or from three. And he's really good at that, but sometimes you just aren't making those shots. And the threes that he was creating and the rest of them weren't creating just weren't going down. And sometimes that's all that matters in a given game.
Yeah, especially these days, right? And I try not to take too much out of the part of it too, because OKC just what happens if they shoot 35% from three instead of 15%, right? Like that game looks entirely different. I will say it did feel like a moment for Giannis and the Bucks, though. It really, and maybe I'm just sort of buying into all like the pomp and circumstance of the whole Vegas thing and the champagne and trophies of it all. But this is not an accident, right? Like this is a culmination of a process after starting the year 2-8. They've been eighth in net rating over the last 15 games. They've righted the ship. And you gotta give credit to Giannis. He's playing at an MVP level. I think it's him and Jokic as 1A, 1B. To me, it's those two guys and it's everybody else behind them. And then Damian Lillard's been playing well. Their defense has really gotten better, especially since Doc Rivers moved AJ Green into a nightly rotation spot, and then obviously Andre Jackson Jr. into the starting spot, moved some guys out. They get Chris Middleton back, even though he wasn't there for the NBA Cup title game. But I thought Doc Rivers has done a really good job turning this thing around too, and all the things that they've been trying to do, right? Like the new defense that they installed with, keeping a big, like planted in the paint by the rim, basically 24/7. This new like low post Giannis thing, right? We saw them really kind of torch Oklahoma City's defense with Giannis in that low post, kind of getting into Brook Lopez on the cut or other guys cutting behind the Thunder defense. And, yeah, maybe the 3-point shooting variance was part of this, but either way, win or lose, like the Bucks really competed with a team that is been far and away the best team in the regular season so far. Their net rating is just like bananas right now. It's like the best since the '97 Bulls. So, the fact that they won the game, hung in the game, were competitive with maybe the best team in the NBA, a team that a lot of people are picking as a title team, maybe winning the championship altogether. That's meaningful to me. I do take something away from that.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I view it more as like the culmination, like you said, of the way they've been playing over the last few weeks, rather than a cup specific kind of thing.
Right.
Like they've been playing a lot better. Giannis has been playing like an unbelievable level. I think both Dame and Brook have been better recently than they were earlier in the season. AJ Green and Andre Jackson, like you said, contributing to the defense and the post up stuff. That was something I did a video on Giannis this morning about the way he sort of dominated that game last night. And so much of the stuff that he was doing from the mid post area was so noticeable. He had like a spinning basket against Jalen Williams early in the game. He had another one against Cason Wallace later in the game. And then from there, he was just sort of picking them apart when they sent double teams. He's being doubled. This was part of the video that I did earlier, too. He's being doubled at the third highest rate in the league on post-ups. And I don't think it's unrelated. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence that he also has the highest assist rate of his career this season. Like, he is doing a really good job of reading that stuff, finding guys, whether it's, Brook on the dive coming from, the 3-point line into the perimeter, finding the near side guy when they send a double from there, or like I think it was on the first or the first half court possession of the game for them last night, at least, where he sort of fired a cross court pass. He was in the mid post on the left side, and he threw it over the top of everyone to Torian Prince in the corner. The shot didn't go down, but like that's the kind of thing that he's doing really consistently.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think it says more about the Bucks in terms of the way they're playing right now than it does about the Thunder, for sure.
Yeah, no question. And this low post stuff from Giannis, just to spend a little bit more time on it too. And it was a great video that you put together. And I, again, plugging the Last Night Basketball Substack again. It's a must subscribe to for NBA fans. But yeah, he said something after the game, talking with, and I'm getting this from Eric Nehm at The Athletic, saying how he's probably just going to be doing this for the rest of his career in terms of what he's been doing in the low post. That he didn't spend a lot of time in it. In previous previous portions of his career, but now that he's gotten used to it, that he's going to be doing it a lot more. He says, I think I'll stay there for the rest of my career because I'm getting better. I'm getting better at it, even though it's something new for me. And there was, like, you mentioned, like those instances in that game. There's another one where he's just making like these quick decisions. Again, Brook Lopez just sort of cutting behind him in a high-low type of action, even though they're both kind of low. But it's still sort of the same concept where, you're bringing back the double, you're bringing in a triple team sometimes, and now you're freeing up your teammates behind you to cut to the basket. And Giannis has always been a good passer. I don't know that he was ever a great one or like an anticipatory one, right? Like he threw to the open guy, but I don't know that he was ever leading his guys open, if we want to use like quarterback terminology. And now he's starting to do that a little bit more. I don't think he's not fully like Luka, Jokic, LeBron level, but he's better than where he was. And it does kind of look a little bit like Jokic sometimes, where he's pulling that double, that triple. He had one across the court. I think it was on to Andre Jackson Jr. Maybe it was Torian Prince in that game, where it was just like one hand, right arm over his head, slung it across the court. And I was like, wow, that was downright Nikola Jokic right there. And so adding that layer to his game, I think has really opened up just not only his game, it's made him more impactful. I think it's made Milwaukee's offense a lot more dynamic. It's not just, what did James Harden call him a couple years ago? Just tall guy running straight and jumping high. Like, it's not that anymore, right? Like there's real reads and stuff. Not to say that Harden was correct when he said that. It was a little too much, but you know what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, I mean, also look, tall guy runs fast and jumps and dunks is really good. That's not like
right.
That's not an insult. Like, if you can do that, that's literally the best thing you can do on any possession is dunk. So if you're gonna call someone like just that, okay, they're gonna beat you if that's what they're doing on every possession. I like what you said about the quarterback stuff in terms of throwing his teammates open as opposed to spotting the open guy. I think that's a really good point. I think also, like, going down to the post and staying there, that's a transition that we see a lot of the best players make as they get into their early to mid 30s. It happened with Michael Jordan. It happened with Kobe. It happened with LeBron. I think LeBron is maybe sort of the closest analog in terms of being a big forward that mostly operated from the top of the key and would get his stuff that way. And that did allow him to use his physicality in a certain way, but going to the block leverages it in a different way and isn't as dependent on being the single best athlete on the floor, which Giannis still is on 99% of nights, but won't be as often as he ages. Like, he's still going to be it more often than not, and probably on 90% of nights, but on the 10% where he isn't when he gets to 34, 35 years old, that makes a lot of difference. I also think it changes the sight lines for a guy. And a lot of times stuff is easier to see from down there, especially when you're as big as he is, 6'11", 7 foot. Like, that just helps you in terms of being able to see the geography of the court in a different way.
And then off the, sort of outside the X's and O's and some of the on-court adjustments, I think I don't think he's ever been a better leader than he is now. I mean, you see the quotes, you kind of hear what Doc Rivers and his teammates are saying about him. And first, you watch him and he is so locked in, man. Like, that guy is just like, this is, and he came out before the Cup game and he talked openly about how much it meant to him. And that's a little risky. Like you could end up with some egg on your face if you talk about, hey, we really want this, we really need this, and then you come out and lay an egg, right? Like that could be a problem. And he didn't care. He said, nope, we really want this. He's telling at a sit down interview with ESPN. He did something with The Athletic. He was just like, yep, this really means a lot to us. We really, we're putting a lot of weight into this. And the Oklahoma City Thunder, by the way, didn't talk about that at all. Like they happened to end up in the NBA Cup in Las Vegas because they're a dominant regular season team. Like they were almost like accidentally in Vegas. Like this was not on their radar. They didn't care about it. The Bucks were the complete opposite. And Giannis came out and he was like, I want it for my teammates. I want the 500 grand for them. All this stuff, and then he came out and then backed it up, right? It was just classic, like old general in the trenches with his guys, and he had, whatever it was, 28, 19, and 10, or 12, whatever he ended up with at the end of this game. He's always led by example, but now he's kind of leading with his words too, and it really does feel like the Bucks needed that from him after their rocky start, and now they're getting that from him. It's really cool to see him locked in, and then he goes out and does the thing and wins. This is like what Giannis. This is his first real accomplishment in the NBA since winning the championship in 2021. I mean, there hasn't been much since then, and now he's got a piece of hardware. And I don't know. To me, that's why I said it kind of felt like a moment because it did feel meaningful for them.
Yeah, I still think that coming in second, third, fourth place, whatever, in MVP is like a real accomplishment. And people shouldn't downplay it. Like I get in this argument with fans of whatever team every year when I do my award stuff at the end of the season, and it's Jokic or Embiid or Giannis or Shea or whoever is like second, third, fourth, fifth, or whatever in my MVP rankings, which are unofficial. So who cares? Like, why are you yelling at me? But also like saying someone that they have one of the 5 best seasons in the NBA in that season is incredible. Like there's 600 guys that play in the league every year. If you're one of the 5 most impactful guys, that is an accomplishment. Like even if you are like a 2-time MVP and a champion and a finals MVP and a defensive player of the year, like still like coming in the top 5 in any given year is still a really big accomplishment. Making first team, second team, whatever, all NBA is still a really big accomplishment. In terms of the team accomplishment, certainly the Bucks hadn't done all that much on a team level in the playoffs since then, mostly because Giannis has been hurt when they got to the playoffs, or Chris Middleton has been hurt when they got to the playoffs. So in terms of a team accomplishment, it's huge. I do think it's interesting that he came out and said all that stuff, and they were talking about how much it means to them. And then he got all the stuff after the game, like, oh, we're not drinking the champagne because we have bigger goals than this. Like,
it was very
how mad must Adam Silver have been today, by the way, like probably going to fine Doc $6 million. Like, like you can't say that stuff about my precious baby, the NBA Cup.
Do you know how much the champagne cost? Like, drink the champagne, right? Yeah.
I do think it's interesting. Like, I do think it's good for the league, though, that you have LeBron and Giannis win in the first 2 years. I think that that gives a little bit more heft. I also think that it would have been good if OKC won and sort of announced itself as like, yo, you got to go through us to win the title. I think that would have been an interesting result, too. I also like it would have been good if Orlando or Atlanta, whoever won, and was like, yo, like we're a real team when it comes to being a contender.
Yeah, I was sort of like secretly rooting for Houston for that exact same reason. I was like, come on, let's see the Rockets hoist this baby. But you get the Pacers against the Lakers last year. I think the NBA Cup at least has worked pretty well. I've seen the reports that maybe they want to expand it from 4 to 8 games in the group stage to ensure that the best teams get into like the knockout stage portion of this. And I hate that. I was like, wait, we already have something to award the best team. It's called the playoffs and the NBA championship. Like that, we have the NBA finals. Like, let this just be this weird, like kind of thing where there's a Cinderella story possibility, this kind of March Madness feel. Like that to me in the middle of November, who cares? Like ultimately I know, like, but who cares? Like just like let it be weird and fun.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I don't know that I'm necessarily like opposed to 8 games. Like I'm sure I'd get used to it eventually, and I'm sure you'd still get pretty weird results because like the nights that you're playing against whatever team, like you might shoot 15% from 3
right
in one of those
There's
games.
Still a knockout stage. Exactly.
Yeah. I think maybe having it end later in the season, like if it's the middle of January or whatever, maybe that could work. But generally, like for me, from a perspective of what I do, I just treat them as like regular games, and the only thing that matters to me is whether the court is a color that I can't see the game as well.
Right.
Like The courts generally don't bother me unless they're red or yellow,
Yep.
because I think that makes it harder to see what's going on. Like the Celtics court is green. Who cares? The Knicks court is orange. Doesn't bother me. Like the Nets court is gray and it doesn't look as good as whatever. Like I don't care. Like as long as you can see everything that's going on, it's still a basketball game. And the result means something in terms of who gets to play in the quarterfinals or in Vegas, or like you might wind up with an extra road game in a given season, like that happened to the Knicks last year.
Mm-hmm.
Although they switched, I think what they did was they switched later in the season. They gave the Knicks a home game back against the Pistons, and I think it was the Pistons that wound up with 42 road games instead. Right now, Dallas is scheduled to have 42 road games, and I would not be surprised if similarly late in the season they say like, oh, let's say you're playing like the Wizards on the road or whatever, they might give you that game back. They did do that for the Knicks last year. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens for Dallas.
Quickly, I just on the OKC part of this too, and again, weird variance, NBA in 2024, all of those things. Prefacing what I'm about to say here, I did think if we were going to try to do a whole like let's big time like daytime radio segment, this is what this means, like overreaction to this game. It might have been an exposure of a flaw that the Thunder do have, and that is the 3-point shooting. They were first in the league in 3-point shooting percentage last year, and I thought that number was a little inflated. I was like, they're a good 3-point shooting team. I don't think they're the best one in the league by percentage. And then in the postseason, we saw that kind of get back to league average, where they, especially in that series against Dallas, where it was pretty bad. But I was like, that like league average feels about right for this roster. And then I had Andrew Schlecht, who covers the Thunder for The Athletic, on earlier this year, and I said, I think we're going to see a dip here. And his point against me was, there's no bad 3-point shooters in the lineup anymore, especially after trading Josh Giddey. And I was like, maybe I'm being a little too harsh, but I still don't think they're the best 3-point shooting team in the league. By percentage, the volume wasn't there last year, and it's not there this year. And now they're 19th in the league in 3-point shooting percentage. And I don't think they're that bad either. I think they're probably, again, closer to 10th to 15th. But they also don't have like a 3-point shooter who scares me. Like I know it's been an off year for Alex Caruso and Casey Wallace, but like, when Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is out there, and this has happened multiple games where nobody else really has it going, he kind of leads the team in 3-point shooting attempts. And I'm like, that's kind of defeats the point of having Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And Jalen Williams' pull-up three is coming along, but it's not quite there yet, where you're rushing out on him and you're freaking out if you leave him open by accident. I don't know. I don't look at this. I look at this roster, and Sam Presti always makes trades before the deadline, one way or the other, and I'm like, okay, if he's going to make a move, what's it going to be? And I'm thinking like a deadly 3-point shooter. And I don't know. I don't have names on top of my head. I don't have anything like that. But having a guy who really strikes fear in the defense as a 3-point shooter, to me, is sort of the missing piece here.
Yeah, I think that was the idea behind starting Isaiah Joe last night. And I think it worked early in the game, but not as much later on. One of the things that I brought up with them when I did the season preview series that I was doing for every team this year was adding someone to shoot threes off the dribble. They were dead last in off the dribble 3-point shooting makes and percentage, I believe, last year. I'm pretty sure I haven't checked the numbers in the last couple of weeks or so, but Shai was pretty close to already having made more pull-up threes off of 2+ dribbles this season than he did all of last year, as of like a couple of weeks ago. So he's probably past that at this point. I would imagine Jalen Williams is pretty close to that at this point too. But you do need guys that can make the defense guard them more closely off the ball. And you brought that up where in the playoffs last year, the 3-point shooting dipped. And at the same time, you saw it, especially in the Maverick series, Dallas just did not care if like Kason Wallace or Lou Dort or Aaron Wiggins or whoever, like they did not care if those guys shot from 3. And I think you're seeing some of the same thing this year. So the same thing last night. Nobody guarded Caruso. Nobody guarded Dort. Nobody guarded Wallace. No teams care if those guys make threes. So it's a little bit different. Like Dort shot really well. I think it was over 40% from 3 last year. It was pretty close to it. But nobody guarded him as a 40% 3-point shooter. They didn't care. And that is what matters, is getting guarded as an elite 3-point shooter as opposed to making the shots. Getting guarded that way matters more because it loosens things up for everybody else. And I do agree with you. Getting like a really knockdown 3-point shooter would be huge for them. the guy I brought up last night because I had just watched the Nets the night before is Cam Johnson. And I think that would be really interesting for them. He fits what they want to do in terms of being like a, 6'8", rangy kind of wing guy that can play multiple positions on the perimeter. He's not a lockdown defender, but he's not a turnstile most of the time. I think he would make a lot of sense for them. How they would get him is more of an interesting and open question. They obviously have the draft pick capital to do it. It's a matter of finding the right salaries and whether the Nets would be willing to say like what they're going to try to extract in terms of draft pick capital, depending on what they're getting back, player wise.
Right, because I like the pick too, because it adds like that positional size, that functionality, the switchability defensively, because you want to add that player, but also not add a player who kind of distracts from the identity of the team, which is, that defensive minded, getting in the passing lanes, long arms, like all that stuff. So Cam Johnson does. One name that doesn't fit this identity, but I thought would be really interesting for them, and it's not realistic, but it was like, how many first round picks could they offer Boston for Peyton Pritchard? Like, it's because they have like 20 first round picks. Like, what if they just like it's like, we'll give you 10? Like, Boston would have to say yes, right? Like, it would be crazy, but obviously that would not happen. But that's sort of the kind of player who I think would be really interesting in Oklahoma City, who would actually just sort of be a different dynamic. Draymond Green was talking about, getting Dennis Schroeder in Golden State, and he was asked, how is Dennis Schroeder going to fit? And he's like, he's not. And that's the point. He's going to do something different. He's adding something to the roster that we otherwise did not have. And it does feel like the Thunder have a lot of like these Aaron Wiggins, Kaysen Wallace's, longy, rangy wings that are okay shooters, but nobody's guarding them type players. Right. And it feels like they just need like a jolt of like that. And you're exactly right. Like a guy with a reputation for being a great 3-point shooter, whether or not the shot's going in or not, it's like, oh my God, we got to go over that screen. We got to make sure we have a guy on there, even if he's on the weak side of the play, like all that kind of stuff. And they don't really have that guy yet. But let's close the book on the NBA Cup. Congrats to the Milwaukee Bucks on your smaller banner and the closed champagne. You wrote in a recent Substack roundtable that you guys do. It's like you, Mark Stein, like a bunch of people do it, and you guys are doing it like occasionally. I don't know exactly how often, but you wrote that defense isn't dead, and that was like a key trend for you. What did you mean by that?
I feel like all of the talk this season has been about like how teams have solved offense, and that's the problem with the NBA, and how like it's all just everybody takes and makes too many threes. And like we need to figure out ways to make defenses better. Defenses are better this season. Scoring is down almost 2 points per 100 possessions. That's like the first time in a while where it's down at least down a significant amount. Like that's a pretty big difference year over year to go up or down 2 points per 100 possessions. Generally, offenses do get a little bit better over the course of the season, but going up, 2 full points per 100 possessions to get where they were last year, or to, show the type of improvement year over year that we've seen in some seasons, that's a lot from now to the end of the year. I don't know if you can expect that to happen. We've also seen like some of the best defenses in recent memory. Like this Oklahoma City defense has been the best in the league so far this season. Even last night, they held the Bucks, well below expectation of where their offense has been throughout the season. The problem for OKC was on offense. So the Bucks this year, I haven't checked the numbers this morning, but coming into last night, that defense was like the second best in like modern NBA history since the merger in 1976 in terms of how much better it is than the league average defense. The only defense better was like one of the, the early 2000s Spurs teams, where basically if the league average in a given season is like 90 points per 100 possessions, and you allow 99, then your defense is 10% worse than average. If you allow 81, your defense is 10% better than average. So a defense that gives up 90 points per 100 possessions in a season where the league average is 90 is not as good as one that gives up 95 in a season where the league average is 100. Like, so this OKC defense has been better than a lot of defenses that have been better on a per possession basis. You look, the Rockets are in like the top 10, 15 in that same measurement. The Magic are in the top 20 in that same measurement. We've had a lot of really, really good defenses this year, better than a lot in recent memory. And the league average overall is down. So like defenses are better this year, but all everybody talks about is how teams have solved offense and we have to, limit the number of threes or move the 3-point line back or, cap the number of corner threes or whatever. Like, I think to me, it's more about defenses need to step their games up. And some defenses really have, whether it's in scheme or execution. And I think we saw the same thing in the NFL where people were like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Defenses can't play. And then, we saw defenses innovate. We saw teams decide we're going to take away deep passing instead of taking
Too
away
high shell. Yeah.
Right. We're going to take away deep passing instead of taking away runs, which has been the foundation of defense since football has started. And we've seen now that teams can take away runs even while taking away deep passing. And we've seen teams go like, you watch the Vikings play defense, what they're doing is insane. Like, where is the NFL version of that where you're just doing stuff that is so much different than everybody else in the league and it forces teams to adjust? Where is even the NBA version of like what Tom Thibodeau did in, the 90s and early 2000s, where they literally had to change the rules of offense so that teams could combat what they were doing defensively? I don't think we're seeing enough defensive innovation at a level that is commensurate with what we're seeing offensively to force offenses to adjust back. And I think that that's the thing we need to see more than like changing the rules so you can't shoot as many threes anymore.
I'm glad you brought up Thibodeau because I was gonna talk about him. Yeah, you reminded me of him when you were talking, and you see those schematic shifts, right? Like you see guys kind of go into the low post, and then you do that, and then you got Thibodeau kind of doing what he's doing, and then you've seen maybe like a little bit of schematic experimentation out of Miami with Eric Spoelstra with this zone defense, but that's just kind of more like well, what we're doing right now isn't working. Let's just kind of go with this throwback. It's almost like running like a wing tee in the NFL because nothing else is working. But it's like,
and teams are doing that now too. By the way, teams are breaking out like wing tee stuff, different formations, but these like fake toss, inside handoff to the guy coming back, like that's wing tee stuff.
Yeah, what's old is new again. It's funny in every way, but I think maybe instead of the schematic changes, I think it's more maybe of a roster building change that we're seeing defensively because. The big trend in offense over these last 10, 15 years, I guess, has been the high pick and roll, right? Mm-hmm. And it was just every team running pick and roll and pick and roll. And what you would do is, hey, call up the guy with the weakest defender on him, bring him into my screen. Our best offensive player has the ball in his hands, and he's going to pick on your worst defensive player. And we're just going to do that. And we're going to spam that over and over and over again. And I think what front offices have realized is, oh my God, we can't have weak defenders on our team. We can't have these weak links on the court, maybe one at a time, but we can't have multiples of them because that just kind of gives a smorgasbord to these great players who are doing this. James Harden, LeBron James, whatever, and then obviously the players now who are doing it. And so I think they've kind of flushed their rosters of those weak defenders and then started filling them with like strong defenders. And you look at like a team like even like Orlando, it's who's the bad defender in their rotation? Who's even in Atlanta, Trae Young is certainly not a great defender, but they've surrounded him with like 4 good to elite defenders at all times. And maybe that's what it is. It's like, okay, like we had a lot of places that you could pick on before. You're not going to have quite as many of those places that you could pick on anymore. And I just look at the way that the smart front offices are building. Even Boston wins the championship last year. Everybody talks about their defense and the three-point shooting there. Or their offense, rather, and their three-point shooting. Their defense is what carried them to the championship last year. That's what made them so dominant, right? Charlotte is also shooting 53 pointers per game, and they stink because they can't stop anybody. So it's the other part of it that you need, right? It's that 3-and-D. So, yeah, maybe, I don't know. I'm kind of just thinking out loud here. I hadn't thought about this until you started talking, but maybe it's more of like a personnel shift as opposed to a schematic shift.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Something that Seth Partnow talks about a lot is that, especially when you get to the playoffs, a lot of times it is about being able to mitigate weaknesses as much as it is having strengths, and not having any weak points defensively is one of the best ways that you can do that. I also think you need to be able to do multiple things defensively. If you only have one way you can play defense, you're going to get beat. Like, no matter how good your defense is. A few years ago, that Knicks-Hawks series, the Knicks were really good defensively during the regular season, but they only had one way they could play. And once Trae Young figured it out, that series was over. Yep. And we saw that in the NBA quarterfinals too, where the Knicks in the first half, they did really well against Trae. And he didn't have an assist, I think, until like a couple minutes left in the first half. early in the second half, he figured it out, and the game was just over at that point because the Hawks could do whatever they wanted offensively, and the Knicks offense sort of ground down to a halt. You got to be able to do everything, and you got to be able to have guys on the court where, at the very least, you can cover for their weaknesses, and preferably you want to not have any weaknesses out there. I do think that the zone stuff is something more teams should explore, even if it's just as nothing else is working for us. And I think teams need to get more exotic with the way they play zones too. That's the thing that I brought up, like with the Vikings in the NFL. They a lot of times will run blitzes and play zone behind it, and that is not something that teams usually do. I think having more than just like a standard 2-3, 3-2, 1-3-1, like having zones that change shapes on within a given possession, or from, like, if the ball goes here, this is how we're going to play this zone. If the ball goes there, this is how we're going to play this zone, and it sort of changes shapes so teams don't necessarily know what you're doing throughout the entire possession. I think that, like, we're going to play zone. One possession, it's going to be 3-2. One possession, it's going to be 1-3-1. Like, changing things up so teams don't know what they're getting. I think that something I wrote about a couple of years ago is putting more pressure in the backcourt to make teams waste time so they don't have as much time to run their offense. I think that is something that we need to see more of. It's really hard to do especially to ask your starters to do it because they play so many minutes. But maybe that's a thing, like, have your starters play 30 minutes instead of 34, 36 minutes, and you can ask them to do it a little bit more. Like, one of the things we see with the Rockets, obviously Dylan Brooks will guard you literally anywhere on the floor. They bring in Aaron Holiday. He's guarding 92 feet from the basket every second that he's on the court. Ahmed Thompson, Tari Easton, they're guarding you everywhere when you're on the court. And, like, maybe they're not doing it as much with Fred VanVleet or Jalen Green or whoever, but those other guys, they're doing it every single second. And having more guys that you're willing to do that with, whether it's in your starting lineup, maybe you don't play your starters 36 minutes a night because you're willing to do more defensively than other teams are.
Right. These guys are almost like your pass rush specialists. It's like your blitz package. I think we're just going to do the whole show just like relating the NBA to the NFL and just keep this metaphor going.
I do think it's instructive. Like, you should be able to take ideas from other sports or from college football or wherever. Like, that's something that you see in the NFL all the time too. Andy Reid will get ideas from high school teams that he watches on tape. Like, you got to be willing to steal from anywhere, not just other NBA coaches, but college basketball, women's basketball. Go look at what WNBA teams are doing. Like, I don't personally watch that much because I already cover two sports full time, but I'm sure that there is innovative stuff that you could try coming from there too.
One of the other schematic things, or maybe it's a little schematic, it's just more about prioritizing things. I watched the Oklahoma City Thunder play defense, and we know about their deflection rates, their steal rates, they're turning the team over at 1 out of every other 5 possessions, and all these things. And I think about as everybody becomes good at shooting the basketball, like everybody's just so good at shooting, so good at scoring, generally speaking, especially when you compare this era to past eras, that defense has gotten so much harder because there's just so many guys you have to account for. And no matter how well you guard sometimes, good shooters are going to make tough shots. And I find it interesting that Oklahoma City has decided, instead of actually contesting the shot, we're just going to take the ball away from you, and you're never going to get the shot. I think steals and blocks are never going to be more important than they are maybe over these next few years, where it's just like, you know what? We're not even going to let you take this shot because everybody's making this at a 35, 36% clip anyway. Doesn't matter. We're just going to take the ball away from you. And then obviously, that fuels your transition offense and all of those things. But that value of steal the ball equals a stop, score on the other end, those little stop and score swings, I think that stuff is going to be so important going forward.
Yeah, I think tracking like pick sixes is a good idea. And, I'm glad you brought this up because I actually wrote about this earlier in the season in terms of, like, teams are trying to force more turnovers now. Like, they are putting more effort into that. For a while, like, I remember I wrote for 538 a bunch of years ago where, like, the other revolution in the NBA was just like nobody was ever turning the ball over anymore. And I think some of that was teams were trying to minimize fouls, and as a result, were playing very passive defense and weren't forcing as many turnovers. I think one of the biggest things you could do defensively now is find a way to force turnovers and not foul at the same time. If you can do that, you're going to be a leg up on every other defense. I also think crashing the offensive glass more often so that your opponent doesn't have as many possessions. Like, figuring out a way to win the possession battle in terms of force more turnovers than your opponent, get more offensive rebounds than your opponent, and foul less often than your opponent is huge. That's something that I have up on the site now, is like tracking the who's winning the possession battle on a night-to-night basis. Very unsurprisingly, 4 of the teams in the top 5, Oklahoma City, Houston, Boston, Orlando.
There you go. Well, I did want to ask you, so, here are the top 10 defenses by defensive rating so far. Oklahoma City, Houston, Orlando, Minnesota, the Clippers, Memphis, Golden State, Boston, Cleveland, Miami. Those are your top 10 defenses. You're welcome to pick any other defenses, but just for the sake of the listener, I wanted to kind of give the top 10. But if you were just sort of, I guess, building your own playoff team, and you got to just pick one defensive unit, that's your defense for the playoffs, which one of these defenses would you want for a playoff series?
Oh, Boston. Like,
same. Yeah.
It's not even like it's not close, honestly. Like, if you tell me that like Porzingis is healthy and Horford is healthy, so you have the options there, like no question for me.
Yeah, obviously, Oklahoma City is number 1. You already read the stats about how they're so elite over this last era, and then Houston's obviously great. But to me, Boston is like, first of all, foot a little bit off the gas, right? Like they're not all the way in the left lane going through the express. They're kind of in the middle lane taking their time. They know where they're going. Still just sort of a walking, like just roll out of bed top 10 defense. They have everything, right? They have the length, they have the great point of attack defenders with White and Holiday. And then more importantly, and what they have that Oklahoma City and Houston don't really have is the length. With Tatum, Brown, they've got Porzingis. Would have been really interesting to see that NBA Cup game, by the way, if Chet Holmgren had been involved, just to see like that body match with Giannis. But Boston's got all the stuff, and as long as they're healthy, I agree with you. I think they're going to easily be the best defense in the playoffs, and that could just be the thing that matters in the end.
Yeah, I mean, like they have 2 guys that are at their best, all NBA caliber defenders that are the 3rd and 4th best perimeter defenders in their starting lineup. Like Tatum and Brown are really, really good defenders. They would be the best perimeter defenders on most teams in the league, and like they are pretty clearly the 3rd and 4th best defenders in their own starting lineup, which is insane to think about.
Absolutely wild. The Athletic reported during the first quarter of that NBA Cup title game, by the way, really interesting time to drop this story, that the Nuggets were interested in trading for Zach LaVine. They mentioned a couple of other offensive players there. Obviously, Zach LaVine is the headliner because a lot of people didn't think anybody was interested in trading for Zach LaVine. But what do you think about LaVine in Denver?
I think, first of all, it's been great to see him back and playing well. He has one of the most aesthetically pleasing offensive packages in the league now, and honestly, over the last however many years he's been in the league, he is just so smooth in the way he moves. His jumper is so fluid, and a lot of times you have players that look that smooth and aren't elite athletes. He, even with all of the injuries over the years, when he's actually healthy, is such a next level athlete that not many other players can compete with. I think that anytime you put someone who is both an elite shooter and a really high level athlete with Jokic, it's going to work well offensively. I'm a little bit worried about what the defense would look like with him and Jamal Murray in the backcourt. But I don't know that that's necessarily that much different than like him and Michael Porter Jr.
Right.
The difference is Michael Porter Jr. is 6'10" and has like a 7-foot wingspan, whereas LaVine is like 6'5", 6'6", and has a wingspan probably pretty close to 7 foot, though, honestly. But it is a little bit different when you're not quite as tall. But offensively, I would love to see him play with Jokic. I think that would be awesome.
It would be a lot of fun. He's a better player than Michael Porter Jr. So if you're the Nuggets, you're looking around the league. The last time you won the championship in 2023, the best teams have only gotten more talented. The Thunder have added talent. Boston, Cleveland. You just go down the line. All these teams have added more talent. You really haven't. You've lost talent. And so this would be just, hey, let's just up our talent quotient a little bit here so that maybe we can compete with some of these teams. And then I think, like, okay, Michael Porter Jr. looked like that with Jokic. Just is whatever you think of Zach LaVine right now, he's been doing this in Chicago, okay? Like, put him next to Jokic and see what he looks like then. Like, whatever you think of LaVine now, you're going to think a lot higher of him after he's playing with Jokic. It's a little bit like, here we go again, when another, like a wide receiver would come to the Patriots and then Tom Brady's throwing to him all of a sudden. You're like, wait, Wes Welker could do this? I had no idea, right? I think it would be a little bit like that.
Yeah, I love how we keep going to the football comparisons. I do think like LaVine is going to give you the same like dribble handoff and just elite shooting stuff that you get with Porter when he plays with Jokic, but he is so much better in terms of creating for himself and others
Yeah.
off the dribble. Doesn't always make the right shoot pass decision, but that is in there where we've seen him do it before. He's got to do it on a more consistent basis. But I think when you play with Jokic, a lot of times the best version of yourself as a passer comes out of you. I think we've seen that with a lot of guys. And like you said, everybody that goes and plays there with him, you're going to get the best version of that player. We saw it with KCP. We saw it with Bruce Brown. We saw it with Jeff Green. We've seen it with everybody else that's been there. Like, other than Yusuf Nurkic, because he was, the guy that Jokic obviously took his job as a starter. Everybody else that's come there, you get the best version of that guy.
This whatever this version is of Russell Westbrook, even like
oh yeah, like
this.
Russ isn't shooting at all. Like he's still not making the shots from pretty much anywhere. I think he's even like below 40% from the field, in addition to whatever from three. But like he's cutting more than we've ever seen. The defense I think is more locked in than it's been in recent memory.
Yep,
he's still not what he should have been and what we thought he would be coming out of UCLA, especially where he was like a really good defender in college. And then that's just sort of disappeared for the most part in the NBA. But yeah, you're going to get the best. And as long as he stayed healthy, I think it would be like their offense would reach another level even from where it usually is with Jokic on the court.
The shot creation part of that is so key because it's almost a little bit of a hedge too of like, okay, maybe Jamal Murray did have his powers completely Space Jam zapped away from him. And like this is a little bit of a hedge against that, and that to me is interesting.
I do think it's difficult to hedge with two guys who are very injury prone at this point, and when they're not fully healthy, you can see the drop off very dramatically with both of them.
All right, I want to do our winners of 2024. So I have a list prepared. I gave you a little bit of a heads up here. I don't know if you have any people on a list here.
Yeah, I came up with like probably too many, honestly.
Oh, I love it. Okay, then hit me with your first one. Let's go. Winners of 2024. That doesn't mean the season. It's just January to December 18th when we're recording this. Our winners of the year.
So I have a group of 5 coaches as my winners.
Okay, I had coaches. I had 2 coaches, but give me your list. Yeah.
Joe Mazzulla, Kenny Atkinson, Jamal Mosley, Mark Dagnall, and Ime Udoka.
Yep, all great. So I had Mazzulla and Dagnall, and I just thought just the young alternative coach who says weird stuff in the media. Like that to me was the winner. The Mike McDaniel. Here we go again. Like that. It's like we never this wouldn't have worked 30 years ago, but it's working now, kind of thing. That coach is having a moment right now.
For sure. I also think that those coaches specifically have sort of brought something to the table that all of those teams needed. Like Mazzulla in the first year caught a lot of heat for like, oh, he doesn't take timeouts or he's weird and he watches the town all the time. I think you can pretty clearly see that they've been like, obviously the roster is better, but I think that their offense specifically has been better with him because he has jacked up that 3-point rate so much, and he's gotten them to play within the flow so much more often than even they did under Udoka. Atkinson has come in and right away been really, really good for that Cleveland team's offense. So much more of what we needed to see from Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland and Evan Mobley doing more offensively. Jamal Mosley and Mark Dagnall and Udoka getting top 5 defenses out of teams that are like 3 of the 5 youngest teams in the league is insane. That never happens. And they're now both doing that. Obviously this year for Udoka and this year and last year from Mosley and Dagnall, like that is just so impressive. And I think especially what Mosley has done this year, weathering the absence of Paolo and then Paolo and Franz and Udoka sort of getting more out of the younger guys coming off their bench, and then just what Dagnall is doing with OKC on a night-to-night basis. Like all of those guys, huge winners for me in 2024.
Jamal Mosley is so impressive. I think he's skyrocketed up the top coaches of the league chart wherever that exists. Mm-hmm. Like he's instituted a culture there, and I'm telling you, like being in Miami, seeing that team a million times a year, when they come into town, it used to be okay. We're the only Magic. We're kind of the little brother here. Mm-hmm. Even if they sometimes had a better record or would beat the Heat, they always just felt like loser little brother a little bit. And Jamal Mosley just flipped that on its head right away. He's like, we're not going to be loser little brother. In fact, we're going to beat these guys. We're going to be the big brother in this state. And, they obviously have not had the recent success that the Heat have. I'm just talking about the way that the team carries themselves. They walk into the arena now, and they feel different. They feel like they literally are bigger than the Miami Heat now. And Jamal Mosley is really leading that. I think he's talked about how he looks at Eric Spoelstra as sort of like as a reference quite a bit, and you can kind of pick up on some of those similar things. Defense first, the culture part of that, the professionalism, the detail orientation in terms of the game plan and all these things, how well that team is prepared. Going up and down in the rotation and not, for the betterment of the team and not being selfish if you're not getting the minutes and all these things. Like all that stuff is really starting to take hold in Orlando, and that's a really hard thing to do and to accomplish, especially as a coach with as little experience as Mosley had when he walked into that job. So good. I like all the coaches. I got one here. I'm gonna go Kristaps Porzingis. Just one. He's just won 2024, man. Like that guy started his career at the Knicks. It was like the first unicorn when we started talking about unicorns. Injuries kind of ruin his career. He gets traded to Dallas. That kind of flames out. Ends up in Washington, of all places, where he actually played really well that last year, but nobody cared because nobody watched the Washington Wizards, except, I guess, for Brad Stevens and the Boston Celtics, because they went ahead and traded their heart and soul Marcus Smart in a 3-team deal to go get him, plopped him onto the Boston Celtics roster, and all of a sudden, like, everybody's paying attention to KP again. They're calling, like, people would go so far as to call him the most important player on the Celtics, which I always thought was a little too overstated, but got the point across. I got it. Like, the mismatch stuff, everything that he's doing there, like, he is thought of so differently now than he was, like, a couple years ago. Like, he is a huge winner of 2024. It was he got to leave Washington, go to a winning organization, won a championship, big year, got the standing ovation in the finals when he came back. Just like a big year for Kristaps.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I love this call out. I view it as sort of like a supersized version of Aaron Gordon going to the Nuggets, where it just unlocked exactly what he is supposed to be. Like, everything clicked into place in terms of what he is as a player, being able to be on that team. And he elevated them to such a level beyond even where they are. Like, even if you had the lineup without him, like we saw at the beginning of this year, or even for a bunch of the playoffs last year, that team is still incredible and probably could have won the title even without him. It probably could have happened. But he takes them to like a level of unbeatable that is, really, really impressive. And I think it was like the truest version of himself came to fruition because of the place he landed in a similar way to Aaron Gordon. So I love that call.
Give me your next one.
My next one is Nico Harrison, the general manager or president or whatever he is in Dallas. I did not like most of his moves at the times that they happened, and they all worked. So, like, nothing really I could say. Like, I thought the Gafford deal was pretty good. I really did not like the PJ Washington deal in terms of, like, giving up a first-round pick to get him, and, like, he was not trying defensively in Charlotte, and, like, what are you really going to get out of him? And the shooting had sort of gone by the wayside. That worked out just about as well as possible. The Gafford deal worked out just about as well as possible. The Kyrie deal has worked about just as well as possible. The Derek Lively deal, which is something that I actually did like, moving down from 10 to 12 and getting off of the Davis Bertans contract to do that, worked out really well. Like, I've been wrong about almost everything that he did.
He's batting 100, or batting 1,000, or rather. Like, they all worked. Like, every move. Like, he's on a heater right now as a guy in charge of basketball decisions. It's a great call. He took Kyrie Irving on when nobody else wanted him. He said, you know what? We're gonna pair him with Luka. Everyone's like, I don't know. Like, is that really the right fit? You want to take the ball out of Luka's hands, put it in Kyrie's hands? He's like, yep, that's exactly what I want to do. And Luka's embraced it. Jason Kidd has coached that team right. The Kyrie Irving thing has really worked for him now, and obviously all those other moves, like making those big moves at the deadline, kind of fuels their run to the NBA Finals. Yeah, he's had an awesome year. I think Dallas's front office has been the best front office in the league over these last couple of years, basically since he took over. Just in terms of, like, beyond the Prestian, just sort of accumulate draft picks type of front offices. Like, this is a guy who's identifying players, trading for those players, getting them at good value, and then those players are playing better and flourishing with them than they were in their previous stops. Like, that is the hard part of general managing. Anybody could trade good players for draft picks. It's the doing that part. That's the hard part to me, and they've nailed it.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of guys playing better is like similar to Jokic. I think when you're on a team with Luka, you're probably going to play better, especially if one of your things is like, oh, he's just not hitting shots. Like, you're going to get the easiest shots of your career when you go down there. I think that has worked out obviously really well for PJ Washington in particular. I think it worked really well for Derek Jones last year. Part of it is that I think that before this offseason, you might have gotten some pushback on the best front office in the league over the last few years. I know a lot of people were talking about the Knicks for that. I think a lot of people really did not like the Mikal Bridges trade, which obviously has not played at a level commensurate with what they gave up for him, even if he's been better lately. The Towns trade, I think, has worked sort of exactly as they expected it to. It has supercharged the offense to the point where on most nights you kind of can't stop it, and the defense has been inconsistent at best. But yeah, I mean, Dallas, really good. No complaints on my end from what they're doing.
Give me one more that you're excited about as we kind of close our time here.
So I've got two more to go on my list.
I give them.
The first is like the two players that I think have increased their value or reputation the most this year, which is Isaiah Hartenstein and Dyson Daniels.
Yep, I had Dyson Daniels on my list. Yeah, I love it.
Hartenstein, from like the time he took over as the starter in New York to even through last night, playing a really good game against Milwaukee, even if things didn't work out the way that the Thunder wanted. I mean, that guy's just been unbelievable in his prime, wound up in the exact perfect place. He is such a good fit for Oklahoma City. He was absolutely incredible for the Knicks over the second half of the season, up to and including in the playoffs. Just really, really good player, got paid more than you could ever imagine. Like the best fit it could have possibly welcomed for him. Like, as a Knicks fan, I wanted him to stay in New York. He made the absolute right decision to take more money on a better team. Like, good for you. And then Daniels,
I should have it was an oversight. He's absolutely a winner in 2024. Went up tax brackets. Good for him.
I don't know if he pays. I mean, he has to pay less than taxes in Oklahoma City than he did in New York. Like, we pay so much of taxes here.
Right.
And then Daniels, just like true breakout, single best perimeter defender in the NBA. Like, he was sometimes not even getting that much burn on the Pelicans. I remember, I can't remember who it was last year that was like insisting to me that Daniels was even a better defender than Herb Jones. I was like, all right, come on. Like, he's a good defender. Like, let's not go that far. And like, flat out, I was wrong. And not because I was wrong about how good Herb Jones is. Like, Daniels is just that good.
Yeah. He's been amazing. I've said this before on the show, but like, I've got sort of an Emmy for best perimeter defender in my pocket that I'm waiting to hand out. It currently resides with Jalen Suggs. Like, he is my favorite perimeter defender to watch. The way that guy just competes.
Absolutely in love with him. Like, right? My God, I love watching that dude.
Love watching him play defense. Dyson Daniels is coming for that Emmy though. Like, he's like, nope, I'm more entertaining. It is so much fun to watch him. I texted somebody in the Hawks front office. I was like, be honest. Like, did you see, like, what did you see with Dyson Daniels when you got him in that Murray trade? And they're like, look, we thought he could be a really good defender for us. They had no idea he was going to be this good, this fast. Like, it has taken them by surprise too. Like, nobody had this in the scouting report for them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's similar. Like, OKC, did you love Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? Yeah, right. But did you think he was going to be this? Absolutely not. Like, yeah, that kind of thing happens all the time, honestly. And if you're lucky enough, like the Knicks, when they signed Hartenstein to a 2-year, $18 million deal, they obviously didn't see this coming. And if they did, they would have paid him more so they wouldn't lose him for what they did this offseason, you know? Like, you see that kind of stuff, and it works out well for teams. Yeah, I mean, it's good for them, good for him. Like, they got draft picks in that deal. Like,
they did. They won that
trade Daniels straight up for DeJounte at this point? No.
Right, exactly. Like, you would never make that deal right now. Just to round out the players, it feels like we have to say Anthony Edwards. Just a big year for his Q rating. Adidas in general, just like good for them all around. Yeah. My last one here is Adam Silver. He got everything he wanted, man. He got the NBA Cup, 2 years of the NBA Cup got the new TV rights deal. He instituted parity, got the second apron, like everything that Adam Silver wanted. The way that he viewed the NBA is now built in his image. Like this is now fully Adam Silver's NBA.
Mhm.
We can debate whether or not that's a better NBA than it used to be. I know that's a lot of people will talk about that kind of stuff, but I think, um, I think right now the NBA is exactly what he wanted it to be, and so for that
Mhm.
reason, I think Adam Silver is a winner.
That reminds me of another winner because of something that you brought up there. The 28, or I guess 27, because James Dolan actually would spend whatever you let him. The 27 other owners that got the second apron in there so that they didn't have to spend as much money as
Great
Joe
call.
Lacob and Steve Ballmer and what James Dolan would be willing to spend. Good for them. Congratulations. It sucks for everybody else, and especially the new salary matching rules where you're restricted to the first apron if you take in even one more dollar in a trade than you send out. That is terrible. But Adam Silver and those 27 owners absolutely got what they wanted.
Yeah, you could label like our salary cap expert friends, friend of the show, Keith Smith, a lot of, Danny LaRue, who used to host this, like they could be winners
Mhm.
or losers, right? Losers because you have to learn this stupid new CBA. Winners also because you've never been more important in explaining
Yeah.
all this stuff to people who don't quite understand it. So,
Yeah, and I
um,
mean, like we just saw the other day that the cap guy with the Pistons, like, good for you, man. Like,
right.
wave Paul Reed, bring in a G League guy for one day, wave him, bring Paul Reed back. Uh, Brock Aller with the Knicks signed three
Mhm.
guys for $1 more than the minimum, so you can aggregate them in the offseason. Like, you're seeing all kinds of ridiculous stuff with all these cap guys now.
It's great for people who really enjoy that stuff. Jared Dubin, really
Actually, I
appreciate.
have one more, if you don't
Please,
mind.
yes, of course, let's go.
My last one is me because my guy Jordan Miller from the University of Miami has entered the rotation for the
Let's
Clippers
go.
and is getting a whole bunch of burn. I was saying all year when we went to the Final Four, Jordan Miller is the best player on the team. Someone's going to get him in the second round and look really smart for it. The Clippers have put him in the rotation this year. He's playing well for them. And Isaiah Wong, who everybody thought was the
Yes.
best player on that Miami team, got caught by the Patriots. He's actually playing a decent amount, or had been playing a decent amount. I think he's in Charlotte now, if I'm
Yes.
remembering
I saw him the
correctly.
other
He's
day.
getting some minutes out there. But Jordan Miller was the best player on that team, and I was right, and he's getting some minutes for the Clippers. So shout out, good for me too.
Good for you. It's not been the best hoops season so far. We
No,
don't have to talk about that.
we're terrible. But
I
Cam Ward, I got my guy right here.
Well, that was my last thing I wanted to ask you about. Cam Ward, fourth in
Yeah.
the Heisman, snubbed or not?
Yeah, I mean, like, was he snubbed from being first? Probably not. Like,
Right.
Travis Hunter was the best player in the country, just in terms of like when you actually play both sides. Like, nobody's gonna be better than you. Like, he was a top 5 receiver
Mm-hmm.
and a top 5 corner in the country. So, like, even the best quarterback in the country, which Cam was, and like Dylan Gabriel finishing ahead of him. Sorry, like, what are you doing? Um, a player who was top 5 at 2 different positions probably like may even have more value than the best quarterback. I just feel bad that the Miami defense turned every single quarterback that it played against into the second best quarterback in the country. So that's why we're sitting at home playing in the top Pop Tarts Bowl or whatever
It's
in 10
Pop-Tarts
days
Bowl.
instead of the playoffs.
It's ridiculous. It reminds me a little bit of when the Miami Dolphins, but like the inverse of it. We had Marino, no good defense for years.
Mhm.
Marino retires. Our defense gets good with Zach Thomas, Jason Taylor, everything like that. And it's like, boy, wouldn't Marino look great on this? You get Ricky Williams.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
and a
got
run
like
game
Jake
too.
Fiedler and
Right.
like,
It's like the Hurricanes have always had a good defense, and then the one time they don't have a good
Yeah.
defense, they have the best
even
quarterback.
last
The best
year,
quarterback in the country. Yeah.
right, even last year the defense was better than the offense, and like added players this year. Problem was lost both starting safeties to the NFL, and that basically killed the entire season.
Jared Dubin, absolute pleasure talking hoops and a lot more NFL, and then even some college football than I thought we were going to talk. Really appreciate the time, man.
Thank you for having me. Just quickly, I do have a promo running at Last Night in Basketball
Yes.
right now, where it is, if I'm remembering correctly, it's 25% off. And if you go to lastnightinbasketball.com/25% spelled out, if I'm remembering correctly, I'm trying to
I'm going to leave
go
it in the
right
show
here and
notes
look
too.
that
I'll
up.
find it and leave it in the show notes.
It is, yeah, it's last night in basketball.com/25% spelled out, and 25% off of a yearly subscription if you want to do that.
Definitely go do it. I already plugged it a couple of different times, but Last Night in Basketball, it's there pretty much every morning, if not every morning, and it's
Three
a
times
great
a
read.
week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Yep, I love it. So appreciate the time, man.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.